it's Kate Russell here from the Huddle, and this is our next episode of the Huddle Leadership Podcast, a podcast for leaders and by leaders. And I'm very excited to introduce you to Kirrilly Falivene, who is a psychotherapist and facilitator from the Inspired Mind. Welcome to the podcast, Kirrilly.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for having me.
It is fantastic to have you on the podcast. And today we're going to be talking about all things people-pleasing, because that's an important part of the work that you do in your practice. Can you tell me more about people-pleasing and people-pleasing recovery? What does that look like? Tell us more.
People-pleasing recovery came about because I realised through my studies to become a psychotherapist and just living my life and becoming more reflective that I was and am a people pleaser. So I became really curious about what that meant, how that showed up in my life, what was triggering it, how it was affecting my relationships, my personality, and I was noticing it in my clients too, in the work that I was doing in private practice. So I started to get very curious and delve into what could I do to help myself move forward and then to start helping clients. So I guess when we talk about what people-pleasing is, I find that it's when you're doing things for people all the time. You're always saying, you can't say no to things. You're always wanting to say yes. It affects women a lot. I think we're conditioned to be what I call like good girls. We want to please. We seek a lot of external validation. So I would say that people-pleasing recovery is about understanding that there is that need to have external validation and to learn to start turning that gaze inward and to start having more of an internal validation, that you start to understand who you are, get back in touch with that gut instinct that we all have that I think we can get really detached from and start to come from our own sort of locus of evaluation, have our own needs, our own ideas of who we are and what works for us, and then start moving forward from that and developing boundaries, self-care, authenticity and that identity that shifts away from pleasing.
Wow. And as somebody who also identifies with people-pleasing, I think that resonates very strongly around the looking for external validation. And the more stressed I can become, I think the more I look for it.
Yeah.
And the inner critic then pipes up. So it's changing that story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The inner critic, I love how you've touched on that. It's such a big part of pleasing, and we can come across as so accommodating and positive and kind and caring, and yet our inner critic can be so hard on us, so really cruel. And that's certainly a big part of my approach as a therapist, is about learning to notice that inner critic and really changing that voice to a kind and caring voice. And I know it's changed my life personally, being able to start to be kind to myself. And I think as pleasers, that's a big role in recovery, is changing that narrative.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So people pleasing can lead to high levels of stress, and it's sort of like stress upon stress, really, isn't it? And then, so when does your stress result in burnout? When does all of this sort of, because it seems to me that from what I see in the workplace is people do burn out. There's some professions even that are much more likely to go into people pleasing and burnout.
Absolutely. And I do think that burnout's a really important thing to talk about, and especially for women. We're now working in full-time roles, very demanding jobs, very senior jobs, but then there's also all the other things around us that we're still having to do. raise children, a home, maybe as we get older, care for aging parents. There's all those factors that are thrown in. And, burnout can, really be a real hazard, I think. I think the key signs to look for is if you are extremely tired, extreme fatigue, if you're really struggling with your sleep, you've got really bad sleep habits, if you're very irritable, if you're exploding, and having complete meltdowns where you would never have done that before, if you're really having that loss of joy in your life, if you're not having that connection with things that you enjoyed anymore, you don't care, and when you feel, what's the point anymore? What's the point in all of this? And for some people, it can be very extreme. What's the point in going on? They can feel very trapped and that there's no way out. But I think that's actually the irony in when you have that voice that says, I don't know if I can go on anymore. That's actually a really key point. That's your body saying to you, I can't keep doing this. Something needs to change.
Yeah. So people pleasing is then potentially something that then is going to lead us much closer to burnout because we don't have those boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And as you said before, when the stress ramps up, that need for that external validation can get even stronger. And if I just do this, if I just do that, if I just work a bit harder, if I just get this done, if I just prove to this person, if I just prove to everybody that I am good enough, that I'm worthy, we can all ignore the signs as well. I think people pleasers aren't in touch with their body as much as they could be, with those gut instincts, but also what's going on in their body. They can ignore the fatigue, ignore, keep working when they're ill, that kind of thing. Ignore that voice that says, I can't go on anymore. The inner critic might say, be quiet. Yes, we can.
Yeah. So I understand that probably more women are people pleasers than men. Is there any particular reason for that? And is trauma, there's the women, and then what are the other reasons why people might be people pleasers?
Yeah, trauma can play a big part. I think, my belief is that people pleasing is a trauma response. It's actually part of the fight, flight, freeze, and it's actually the fawn response that not a lot of people are aware of. People often think about the fight, flight, and freeze, but fawn is another way that we keep ourselves safe by placating, by being, subservient, I guess is probably a strong term, but being good, not causing any trouble, keeping yourself safe. And that may come from, all different types of reasons. People might have very strict parents where that it was demanded of them that they did as they were told. There may have been a lot of chaos in the family growing up, and sometimes children will want to control things to feel safe. So being really good and doing as they're told. Some children are parentified as well, which means that they have to assume a more mature role to look after parents that may be not able to look after themselves due to their own trauma or mental health. There can be cultural reasons as well. It's expected to care for others. There's a lot of cultures, especially where women and even men are expected to put everybody else before them, that more communal, collective approach where you don't have needs. It's what's best for everybody else and you being there and caring for others.
And so those are quite strong motivators. They are quite strong drivers to this behaviour. And then that may impact on further life decisions that we make around. And I see this because I do some work in family business, and that sense of I've got to be in the family business because that's expected of me. But there's another side to all of this expectation, which is resentment. And so that's what I also see is, so people often engaging in quite passive aggressive behavior over a period of time, and then there's always going to be an explosion. There's a limit to how much people will tolerate.
Yes.
But eventually something will happen and it will cross the line, and bang, here we go.
Yes.
Do you see a lot of that, and how do you support people through that process?
Yeah, I absolutely, definitely do, when you're talking about that frustration, because I think we feel people pleasers can feel very unheard and disrespected and used, but we're so trapped in our patterns of behaviour, we just keep going, we keep pleasing, we keep saying yes, and that frustration, like you say, can explode. So you asked, what can we do? Was that your question? What can we do?
What can we do?
Yeah, what can we do? I think it's, first of all, having a lot of compassion for yourself, really starting to try to change that narrative of, this is my fault, I'm not strong enough, or maybe like that passive aggressive, like you say, maybe blaming others or doing things in an unhealthy way to get our needs met. I think being kind to ourselves and really starting to look at, okay, what's going on here? And without that judgment, okay, I have been doing this because it worked. And I think that's a lot of the work that I do with clients, that we develop behaviours as children to keep ourselves safe and because it works. Having to, actually thanking our younger selves for saying, you kept us safe. You found a way to keep yourself safe, and praising that younger self, because we all still have that inner child within us that needs nurturing and care, and saying, you found a way to do that, and this behaviour worked. And often as adults, I think, like you say, the explosion is probably the time. That's when people come to me a lot, when they say, like, this has happened, I've had a big fallout, or I've burnt out, or I've been diagnosed with depression or anxiety. I can't keep doing this anymore. So they've realised, because this unhealthy coping mechanisms only work for so long.
Yes.
So it's that realisation, okay, it worked and now it doesn't. And I need to find a healthier way to show up and to be in relation with others.
Yeah. I think that's very true. And it is, and there's an awareness, though, that comes with that an ownership of, this, I need to do something about it. And I think one of the challenges that I see that can happen, and you may not have an answer to this, but I often see in workplaces where there's a group of people who are doing something which is hard, they're suffering in that. So they become sort of victim behaviour, and it becomes quite difficult for managers to call it out, because they're working so hard, they're giving so much, and they can sometimes be quite toxic in the fact that in that suffering, and yet it feels like if you challenge that, it's you get this sort of like, but how dare you, because I do so very much, and you don't value me. And I see that because when it gets collective, it gets an extraordinary power. And it's about loving those people. I mean, that my strategy is love them, but I'm just wondering if you got some ideas about strategies for leaders who might be dealing with some of that behaviour.
I love how you say loving them, because that comes under, for me, empathy. And being able to, empathy is the idea, that idea of being able to understand somebody else's world.
Yes.
To sit in their world and see things through their eyes. And I think leaders, being able to say, I see what you're doing in a positive way. I see how hard you work. I see how dedicated you are. I really appreciate that, and I respect what the dedication and the hard work that you're putting in, but I'm also seeing that this must be hard for you. You know, this must be a big burden. You must be carrying a lot. And that must get frustrating for you at times. You know, how is it for you? Opening up that dialogue and saying, tell me about that, showing that curiosity without judgment. And people can start, you know, saying, yeah, actually, it is really hard and I'm frustrated and this. Okay, well, how can I support you?
Yeah.
So there isn't that judgment there, there isn't the, right, you need to change or I see this in you. It's that curiosity and empathy, and creating a safe space for people to be able to own those parts that are difficult, those frustrations, and then you open that dialogue. It's okay, well, how can I support you better? What can I do to make this, you know, space easier for you?
Yeah. I think that's beautiful, and I think that that's spot on, because attacking, and sometimes we're seeing behaviour that's not okay. When it becomes defensive about I've got to suffer and I'm going to work weekends and I'm going to, you know, do this to make sure that I tick the box, so I look after these people. But realistically, as soon as we in any way challenge and confront rather than nurture, the chances are the wall comes up. Yes. And we've now it's become harder.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas curiosity and tell me about it and thank you for all your hard work, because they are looking for that external validation.
Absolutely.
And if you don't give it, then it's very, very easy for them to think that they're not cared about. Mm-hmm. In that workplace. I think that that's so profound, and I love that. It very much aligns with what we talk about in the huddle, which is about empathy, and sometimes you've got to love the difficult. You know, when we're seeing behaviours that are difficult, it's just telling you some information. It's really valuable information. It doesn't mean the person is bad. It's just telling you that they're probably very stressed.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I do think that that is the way forward in leadership and management, that shift from the I'm right and the dictatorial, do as you're told, to praise, understanding, empathy, collaboration, and moving forward together. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you teach empathetic communication. That's part of what you do in your training, part of that. Can you tell us more about how that relates to leadership? Like, can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. As a therapist, I was trained in the person-centered approach to counselling by the wonderful man Carl Rogers. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Heard of him, yes.
Yeah, father of the person-centered approach, and one of the key elements was empathy, being able to convey empathy to his clients meant that they felt understood. So it just felt natural for me when I wanted to reach out to more people that empathy was the key, you know, to empathic, you know, communication for leaders, and being able to shift from that, you know, I am up here and I'm going to tell you what to do and you'll do it, to be able to have that deeper connection.
Yeah.
Leaders being able to develop their communication skills so that they can sit and ask those questions, to be more curious, to understand who their team is, and what their team needs. That, you know, from the work that I've done with people, being seen and heard and respected by a leader. And it may be that sometimes it's like, you know, what's going on for you? And they might be able to say, you know, well, actually, you know, there's a lot going on at home. I've got other demands on me. And if they have a leader who they feel safe to share that with, and to hear that, you know, that's really tough for you. You know, I would never teach a leader to become a counsellor. That's, you know, this is not what it's about. But being able to just say, I hear you. I can hear how hard that is for you. How can I support you? You know, I've had leaders say to me that they've said something that simple to a team member who's just burst into tears and said, I've never had a boss who's spoken to me like that before. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes all the difference. And then it's much easier once you have that rapport and that relationship and trust, then to have some of those conversations, which are sometimes uncomfortable around performance and the like. But also, so that's important. It's the need to be mindful of the way we speak to people. And I often think about if we are thinking in judgment, if we're thinking in statements, we're often thinking in judgment. We're in judgment mode. But if we're thinking in questions, we're in curiosity mode. And it's really powerful to be mindful of, where have I gone as a leader? Which brain am I using today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And that's definitely some of the work that I do with leaders is developing that self-awareness and that reflective, being able to reflect on, what kind of statements am I using? Is there judgment? How might the language that I'm using be perceived by others? How can I start to be more curious and ask those questions and then see what the difference that comes back when I approach people in that way?
Yeah, it's very powerful. So that then just makes me think about going back to where we were at the beginning, which is about that pleasing behaviour, is that when we see people pleasing, are we also seeing people who are potentially insecure and they're, and so we're going to see people who make mistakes more often the more stress they get. Does that go with people pleasing as well?
Absolutely. I think so. There can be a very fragile sense of self under there. If you're, I talk a lot about giving away your power as a people pleaser, because you're seeking that external validation. You're not then in control of feeling like, well, do I believe that I'm good enough? I'm expecting others to validate me constantly. So there is an insecurity there. And, circling back to about burnout, if you feel insecure, then for some people, they will just keep working and working and working. Nothing is ever enough because that belief that I am enough isn't there. So it has to be, I'll keep producing and producing.
Yeah.
And then mistakes, like you say, can be made because you're exhausted, you're stressed, and maybe you don't trust yourself as well. You trust your judgment.
Yeah, yeah. So help me understand, what are some of the strategies, or how do you help somebody move from that mindset of I'm not enough to being enough, and to have that different self-talk?
Yeah, I think it's really getting back in touch with your gut instincts. Firstly, it's the physical things, starting to notice, like, I know for me, I really got out of touch with my gut instinct. So I would meet somebody and feel like, oh, I'm not sure about this person, or I don't quite believe them, or I don't trust them. And then because I'd been told to be good and be kind, I'd say, oh, no, you're judging. Oh, you're judging them. You shouldn't listen to that. You should be nice. And then maybe I would then become aligned or spend too much time with somebody that wasn't good for me. So I think getting back in touch with that gut instinct, because it's always right.
Yeah.
That's really important. And then doing things like, values exercises, starting to work out what are my values. And it's funny because people think they know their values. But if you actually say, what are your top 3 values? Most people will be like, I don't know. So doing a values exercise, starting to break things down into different sections of your life and working out what's important to you. Getting in touch with them and going, actually, do you know what? It might be that honesty or that kind of thing is really important. And seeing the difference between people-pleasing values and your genuine values.
Yeah.
And then I think you can start building on that with things like boundaries and self-care, and what your genuine interests are, so you can come from that internal validation instead of external. And noticing as well, I think noticing your triggers too. Like, when are those times where I feel the need to please. I feel the need to say yes automatically, and will often come up with a lot of phrases. So people will have a few phrases up their sleeve, because often it's, like we say, it's an automatic response, a trauma response. So we will speak before we even think. So being able to notice what's happening in your body and then have a few phrases so that even if you feel a bit triggered, it might just be let me get back to you. So then you're not saying yes and then walking away and going, oh.
Yes. I'm getting better at it because I'm definitely a people pleaser, of saying I need to sleep on something, because it's, if I sleep on it, then it's much easier. I just need to give myself some space from the urge to say yes.
Yes.
Which is powerful. My last sort of thought around this is, what are the challenges for leaders if they are the people pleaser?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Really good question. The thing that's coming to mind is taking care of yourself, and what you just said before about let me sleep on it. You're taking care of yourself in that moment. I think it's becoming aware of times when you please, what impact that's having on you, but also what message you're then sending the rest of your team. Because as a leader, there is a lot of responsibility to you modelling to everybody else how to behave. So taking care of yourself, I think that's what comes up for me, and maybe taking that time to think, what kind of leader do I want to be? And starting to have some phrases that you have up your sleeve as well, that you can use in different situations. It might be, I need to sleep on that. It might be, let's take a moment, everybody, to take care of ourselves in this moment. Let's think things through, so that you can give yourselves time. Often, if there's a lot of pressure and stress, to make a decision very quickly, and maybe let's take a minute so that we can take a breath, calm down, just that second, bring the thinking brain back in line, and give yourself that time to show up as the kind of genuine leader that you want to be.
I love that. I think that's so profound. What a great place to end this fantastic conversation about people pleasing. It is so important because it is so rife. It's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's painful at times for us to know that we're people pleasers and not think, I want to change this, but we don't always have the tools. So it's good to know that you're there, Kirrilly, for people to be able to explore people pleasing and to unpack that and to find new strategies to look after themselves. Thank you so much for today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Kate. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.